Well, I'll try not to be so loud as I was last time and disturb you and make you jump. I hope you've enjoyed your meal. Enjoyed your meal? I think let's just have a round of applause for the for those who have served us. Thank you to Roz, Anne and the team and the girls for serving. Thank you so much for serving us this evening. We're going to invite Rory up. Rory would like to come up and join us. I neglected to do the sort of housekeeping stuff at the beginning, but I'm sure you've already found where the loos are. But if not, through the doors there's one toilet and there's another one through those doors there. And if you can see the fire exit signs, if there is a fire, walk to the fire exit. But yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed your meal. Rory, take a seat. Let's take a seat. And we're going to just spend a bit of time chatting with Rory. So, let me get my clicker out. So, just before, towards the end of the first chunk of what Rory's going to say, there'll be a Q&A session, and what we're going to ask you to do is actually to text your questions to the number that's on the screen, and then we're going to look at those during dessert and make sure that we can get our answers ready, or Rory can get his answers ready for you. And if you haven't got a phone, try and badger someone that has got a phone to send some. It'd be lovely to have some questions for Rory towards the end of the first section. So welcome, Rory. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for coming this evening. You're married to Jill. You've got 3 young sons. Tell us a little bit about your family, Rory.
Sure, certainly. Can you all hear me, first of all? Steve, is this thing up? Okay. If you can't hear, you shout at him at the back there, okay? May I just echo your thanks, Dave, to the catering staff. That was a fantastic meal. Thank you so much. And may I thank all of you for coming out tonight, because I've no idea why you would give up a perfectly good Friday evening to come and listen to me talking, especially when it's so cold. What is going on? I thought it was spring in the UK. What's happening? Anybody that can't see me, turn your chairs. Don't sit with your back and your neck all skew. Just take a minute and turn your chair around so that you can see properly, please. I want you to be comfortable. Because I promise you, when you sit with your neck turned for half an hour, it's not comfortable. Okay, so thank you. So, Dave, your question was about
Let's just correct this, Mike.
Okay. Oh, sorry, it's Mike. Sorry, what did I say, Dave? I don't know, man.
It's not a problem.
I'm getting old. So Mike, who's Dave with the mic. I am married to Jill. I've been married to her for 34 years, and she's a headmistress of a prep school back home in South Africa, just outside Joburg, which means that I've also been married to whichever school she's been teaching at or headmistress of, which is a pretty unique perspective, when you have children at school. Oh, it's not completely unique because other teachers are married too with children, but I've always been very comfortable in an educational environment for that reason. So our eldest son, Kyle, is 28, our middle son, Ian, is 25, and our youngest son, Craig, is 19.
So, and you clearly have an enormous respect and love for Nelson Mandela, and you're going to talk about that in a moment. We're going to wind the clock back to 1963, which was a great year, because it was the year I was born as well.
Good vintage.
But we reckoned, or we worked out that actually you were younger than me, Rory.
Yeah,
so just slightly younger than me. So,
yeah.
But born in 1963, apartheid had been established since 1948. And perhaps you could just, I'm trying to get the screen working. There we go. Okay, so not everyone will know about apartheid. What was life like for people in that system, and for you, particularly as a white guy living under apartheid?
So let's start with the word apartheid. So the last 4 letters, the H-E-I-D, are a suffix, like ness in English. So all that word means, like goodness, kindness, is apartness. That's what the word means, separateness. Now, there's racism in every country in the world, Dave, including here, certainly still in my country. but only South Africa legislated the division of people based on the color of their skin. So yes, apartheid was an ideology, but it was underpinned by a set of laws, and they were iniquitous laws. So you had the obvious one was the Group Areas Act, which exactly as the name says, determined which racial groups could live where in South Africa. Obviously, the cities were all given to the white people, as well as the best of the land. And black South Africans, although they were the majority, by far the majority, white people, when I was born in 63, were probably 14%, 1/4 of the population. There were 4 racial categories under apartheid: white, black, Asian, and colored. The Asians were mainly people from India and Malaya that had been brought by the British, because we were a British colony, as slaves or indentured labor. And the Asian people were, so the colored people were mixed race people. There was also a law called the Immorality Act, which forbade marriage across the color line. There was the Job Reservations Act, which reserved certain vocations only for people from a certain population group. I mean, it became so ridiculous that if you owned a furniture factory, then the feeding in of raw lumber into one side of a machine, a black man could do that because he was unskilled and it was raw lumber. But as soon as it came out the other side of that machine as a table leg or whatever, then only a white person could handle it. I mean, that's how petty and pathetic it was. But so, as I said, if you go back in history, apartheid, or the National Party that instituted apartheid, came to power in 1948, right after World War II, because what should have happened is that Field Marshal Jan Smuts should have become our prime minister after that election. But there was some clever Trump-esque type electioneering in the rural areas, and the Nats came to power, and they instituted this series of laws to separate people based on their race. So by the time I was born in 63, apartheid had 15 years to establish itself. So we have these wonderful African women, folks, that work in our homes. Very often they are semi-educated, even semi-literate. Many of them have a grade 12 or a matric certificate. But very often that's the only work they can get. And they clean our homes, they cook our food, they wash our clothes, they bring up our children. So right now, as I sit here in Luz, we have a lady called Esther who has worked for my family for 23 years. And she has been a second mother to my boys, and they love her dearly. But until school-going age, if she has young children, and Esther has had 3 kids whom we've educated, but if the little boy is living with his mom while she works in our home in a white suburb, now this is going back to 63, then we, as the kids that grew up in that home, will play with those little guys or girls, and then come grade 1, when you're 6 years of age, I'll go off to that school, and that little kid will go off to that school. Meaning that I benefited from a wonderful government education, really good one. But we were only 14% of the population, and if you flip that equation, probably 86% of the education budget was spent on that 14%. So black South Africans received this, not even third-rate education, just this shocking level of education, and we are still feeling the effects of that today. Our education is in a mess in South Africa, largely because of the policies instituted in 48. But the point is, you don't think of that, or you don't contemplate that. You don't wonder, why did I go to that school and there's only white faces in the school? That's how I went to school. Where's that guy now, who I used to play with in the back garden? And so I grew up, to answer your question, Dave, thinking that that was okay, that that was normal. Maybe I was just a bit slow or a bit thick, but I didn't realize that as quickly as many other white South Africans did.
So you became a policeman, upholding the laws of apartheid for 10 years. What were you like as a man, and how was your relationship with other races?
Well, I can't sit here and lie to you in 2022. my attitude to other races was, well, I was quite comfortable having all of this privilege and didn't give much thought, quite honestly, to people of other races. We just accepted that they were there to do a certain role in society, and we were there to do a certain role in society. And I have to say, to my shame, that I was okay with that.
So, not everyone knows this, but so you served Mandela, and Mandela was in prison for 27 years, and we got a slide which will just help us illustrate that. Let's just step through to the slide. It's coming up soon. There we go. Mandela was in prison for 27 years. Just tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure thing. So the party that Mandela belonged to is called the African National Congress, and it was started in 1912, just before he was born. And that was to give a voice or a forum or a platform for African people to express their political and social ambitions. And in 1912, when it was formed, we as a country had just ceased to be a British colony. That ended in 1910 with the Union of South Africa, and we became a republic in 1961. So there was, to some degree, a willingness to listen to an organization that was established to further the aims and ambitions of African people. But come 1948, that was gone. And nobody was listening to any African people. They did not have a voice at all. And so for whatever reason, and I'm not apologizing for it, I'm not explaining it because I'm not a politician, and you need to know that right from the beginning, I'm not. But they formed an armed wing, and it was called Umkhonto weSizwe, which means the spear of the nation, and that armed wing, of which Mandela was a part, was responsible for acts of sabotage like blowing up electricity pylons and the like. And the government of the time, in fact, the year I was born, in 62, 63, arrested the entire high command of the ANC, except Mandela. He escaped. He slipped through the net, as it were, and he was known as the Black Pimpernel, and he was on the run. But they eventually caught up with him, and the site where he was arrested in Zululand is now the site of a beautiful museum with the most magnificent steel sculpture. It's huge. It must be 20 or 30 meters high, and it's made of thin strands of metal that are cut and notched so that when you stand way back and you look at these strands as a whole from a distance, it's the head and face of Mandela. It's actually beautiful. You go close and all you can see are these pieces of steel. Anyway, he was arrested and they were tried, the entire high command. I think there were 14 accused. He was accused number 1, tried with high treason, terrorism, and sabotage, and I think a range of lesser crimes. Had he been convicted of high treason, Dave, he would have hanged in 1964. He would have received the death penalty. And he wasn't. He was convicted of sabotage, thank God, and sent to prison for life. And the first 18 years that he served were on that island, which is a small island in Table Bay. It's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in shark-infested waters, in Table Bay in Cape Town. So if you think of Alcatraz, it's not dissimilar at all. There was hard labor. He had to hew out chunks of limestone in a quarry, and the glare from the sun bouncing off that limestone did some really bad damage to his eyes. That kind of perpetuated right up until the time that I came to serve him in 1996. So if he came into a room full of people and people started pulling out, these were the days before cell phones, of course, but if people started pulling cameras out of their handbags or their jacket pockets, we had to go and tell them, make sure the flash is off. You can't use flash photography with the president because of the damage done to his eyes. But it was a brutal time and in prison. But Nelson Mandela and his comrades, his compatriots in prison there, didn't just sit on their hands and do hard labor. He made a study of his jailers. So he wanted to understand what made the psyche of the Afrikaner tick. Because he knew that at some stage, he didn't know when, but at some stage, they're going to have to start talking to one another, which was exactly the aim of his party all those years ago, going back to 1912. And in order to prepare himself, I mean, just think of the foresight. He's a prisoner. He is subjected to some really brutal and harsh treatment, but he has the foresight to think, you know what, I need to understand these guys. So he started to engage with his jailers. To the extent, Dave, that when he reached his freedom and was released from prison, and we'll get there in 1990, he invited 3 of his prison warders to his inauguration ceremony.
Yes, I remember reading that. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
So he was released in 1990. Tell us about that release, and why is it that you call him Madiba? That's an interesting...
Okay, well, let's start there, and then I'll tell you about 1990. So the name Madiba, which is a name that if all of us sitting here were in South Africa, and we were all black South Africans, and we'd never met the president, so we don't know him, and he walks in the door, every black South African will greet him as Madiba. We as white South Africans would say, Mr. President. And that's fine. Both are okay. Because Nelson Mandela was a member of the Abatembu tribe in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And the Abatembu had their own king. There was a king of the Tembus. And the clan or the bloodline within that tribe who advised the king was the Madiba clan. So when you say to him, Madiba, what you are doing is acknowledging his status in society as advisors to the king. At least that's as it was explained to me. Because when I started on his protection team, I didn't know that. And so I asked my African teammates, why do you call him Madiba? And then they explained to me. They didn't even call him Madiba because they knew him far more intimately than Madiba, which a stranger is, as I said, how a stranger would greet him. They called him grandfather. So the isiXhosa word, because the Xhosa language is the language that the Abatembu speak in Eastern Cape province. And they would call him grandfather, Tata Omkhulu. Tata means father, Omkhulu means great. So they would call him Tata Omkhulu, and the short form of that is Tata. So they would greet him as Tata. Good morning, Tata. We didn't know that either, us whiteys who joined very late in the game. So we learned that from our African colleagues. And you're not being familiar to use the word Tata, because in African culture, unlike us, we Westerners, we are far too quick, folks, be honest, to put our old folks into a retirement village and go and visit them a half a dozen times a year. African people will never do that. They will never do that, because the wisdom of a society or of a community resorts with the elders. So they revere their elders. So if you call him Tata or grandfather, what you are saying is, just like with Madiba, I am acknowledging your status in society as an elder, one in whom the wisdom of our society and community resorts. I respect you. So it's not a term of endearment, of familiarity. It's a term of great respect, and that's what we called him. So that was, we're getting there. Let's go back to how I came to serve him. So one day, remember, I joined the police straight out of high school. I matriculated in 81, and I joined the police in 1982. I did a year's training in the police college in Pretoria. It was not a common thing for a white English-speaking kid to leave high school and join the police, because the police, like the railways, the telecommunications, any government service, was largely the domain of the Afrikaner, because the Afrikaners were in power, and those jobs wasn't quite job reservation, but it was, or sheltered employment at least, but it was, pretty much, if you're going to join the civil service, Afrikaners did that. So for me as an English-speaking kid to leave high school was rare. And my dad, who was a journalist all his life, understood that context much better than I did. I mean, I was only 18 years old. And he knew that I would be going into that kind of Afrikaner-dominated environment. And he was correct, because when I got to the police college, Platoon 7 of Bravo Company, 1982, had 36 men. We slept in a bungalow with 18 beds down this wall and 18 beds down that wall. And of the 36 men, 4 of us were English-speaking. I then left police college, went to a police station called Parkview in Joburg, And one day, the security branch came knocking on my door, and they recruited me. Why? I suppose because I was English-speaking, and I think they knew, because they knew a lot of stuff about people, that I was involved with my church. So they put me on the church's section in the special branch in Johannesburg. Now, you may ask, why would the special branch even have a church's section? It's a good question, but it's also got a good answer. Because a lot of the funding for the anti-apartheid organizations that were all underground in South Africa, because they were all banned, and their members and those who furthered their aims were also banned. So you had banned persons and banned organizations under the regime of the day. And a lot of the churches in Scandinavia, in Britain, in the Netherlands, in Germany, funded or channeled funding to those underground organizations fighting apartheid. And a lot of the funding was channeled through the South African Council of Churches. And the special branch knew that. Pardon me. So we tried to monitor that to try and find out where the funding was going to, because those are the agitators, who were causing some of the strife that the government of the day was grappling with. So I get recruited. On my first day, I'm told by my commander, go up to the 11th floor to the technical division and go and fetch the tapes. Now, the tapes were those old reel-to-reel tapes that played on those old machines, and I put on these clunky old headphones, and I was told, listen to the bugged telephone of a lady called Miriam Kadana, and we'll come to Sis Mary in a minute. And I had to write down anything on those phone calls that I considered to be subversive. That was my briefing. I could only understand about 30% of the conversations because the other 70% were in an African language that I didn't speak at the time. So I did that. Until one day, so that's 86. Fast forward that movie 4 years to 1990, we're sitting in the tea room and the TV is on like this in the corner. And it's the opening of Parliament, and the state president is addressing the nation through the opening of Parliament. And he says, I'm going to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. I'm going to unban all the banned organizations. And somebody in the tea room says, what did he just say? And and it was an earth-shattering announcement. And if you think of where it came in history, February 1990, 89, the Berlin Wall fell. And it was the end of communism in Europe. A mere few months later, February 1990, apartheid is abolished in South Africa. So momentous changes are afoot here. So what that meant was, Dave, that the special branch, as State President de Klerk signed all of those laws out of existence because apartheid had been abolished and they were all legalized, we had no more work because we only concentrated on banned people and banned organizations. So what are they going to do with this young lieutenant? By now I was a lieutenant. Well, Steyn, you go and start the VIP protection unit because the National Party government of the day, Dave, was anathema to the business community and the diplomatic community. They wanted nothing to do with National Party government officials. But now de Klerk makes that announcement, and all of a sudden they become flavor of the month, and everybody wants a piece of them. And all these ministers in the cabinet are traveling all over to Joburg, where I'd been instructed to start this VIP protection unit, so that's what I did. And that is why there was nothing good about me eventually landing up on President Mandela's protection detail. I was just in the right place at the right time.
And how did you think that he was going to approach things as the?
I thought that he was going to approach things like every other African country on the continent of Africa approached transition from a colonial power to a liberation movement. The liberation movement booted out the whole colonial shooting match, lock, stock, and barrel, and took over the government. So why would we think it would be any different? And I thought that Mandela and his ANC colleagues would just, come along and sweep everything that was white and Christian and decent into the sea and establish a Marxist state. That's what I thought would happen.
So we've got a little bit of a clip which gives us a bit
Yeah,
of an
sure.
insight into sort of that first transition. Just going to show a clip from Clint Eastwood's Invictus, and it just shows you the realisation of what this was all going to be about. Let me just get that clip up for you. If I can. Maybe Steve can help if it doesn't seem to be working.
Of course it worked perfectly.
It worked earlier on, yeah, it did,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you talk to Brenda about it?
Yes, yesterday. Ah, that must be Jason with the schedule. Come in, beautiful. What's this?
Mr. Jason Chabalala,
That's me. Am I under arrest?
Captain Fader and team reporting for duty, sir.
What duty?
With the presidential bodyguard, we've been assigned to this office. Here are our orders.
The special branch, right?
You'll see that they've been signed.
Well, I don't care if they are signed. Just wait here. Sorry to disturb you, sir.
You look agitated, Jason.
Well, that's because there are 4 special branch cops in my office.
Oh, what did you do?
Nothing. But they say they're the presidential bodyguards and they have orders signed by you.
Ah, yes. Well, these men are special trained by SAS. They have lots of experience. They protected the clerk.
Yes, sir, but it doesn't mean that they have to come...
You asked for more men, didn't you?
Yes, sir. I asked...
When people see me in public, they see my bodyguards. You represent me directly. The Rainbow Nation starts here. Reconciliation starts here.
Reconciliation, sir.
Yes, reconciliation, Jason.
Comrade President, not long ago, these guys tried to kill us. Maybe even these 4 guys in my office tried and often succeeded.
Yes, I know. Forgiveness starts here, too. Forgiveness liberates the soul. It removes fear. That is why it is such a powerful weapon. Please, Jason. Try.
Sorry to disturb you, sir.
So he became president in 1994. How did you become his chief of security?
And by the way, that's exactly how it was. By the time I got to his personal protection team in January of '96, that had that kind of conflict between the white and black bodyguards had somewhat been sorted out. But in '94, you're right, in '94, when he becomes president on the 10th of May, I was still the commander of the Johannesburg VIP Protection Unit. And I now had a president who had both a home and an office in Johannesburg, where I was the commander. So I ended up spending 3/4 of my working day, pardon me, going in advance to whatever venue his schedule said he had to be at. We would go in advance to that venue, take the sniffer dogs through the venue, whether it was a black tie dinner or a meeting or whatever it was, and make sure it was secure, post my men and women at the entrances and exits of the venue, and wait for the motorcade to arrive. So that's what I did. But there was a specific moment where it all changed for me, David, and that was on the day that Mandela becomes president of South Africa, the 10th of May. So the elections were held on the 27th of April. By the way, I wasn't only the commander of the VIP unit, I was also the commander of the bomb disposal unit in Joburg. And on the 5 days before the 27th of April, the right wing, who had become almost like what the problem they have in the United States now, where you've got this internal resistance and they form militias. They set off 5 bombs, one outside ANC headquarters, one at the airport, one outside the offices of one of the left-wing Afrikaner newspapers, and I can't remember where the other 2 were. But 5 bombs in 5 days. And so on election day, on the 27th of April, 1994, I was driving around in an unmarked police vehicle, just waiting for the call to come through on my radio to tell me which polling station had been blown up. And nothing like that happened. And I and many other Christian people in South Africa believe that is because Christians all over the world got on their knees and prayed for that election to be peaceful. And that is an absolute fact. So, having sworn the oath of office before the Chief Justice at the Union Buildings on the 10th of May now, when he is inaugurated, he gets in a helicopter and he flies the 60 kilometers south to Joburg, to Ellis Park Stadium, which is a rugby stadium, because somebody on the inauguration committee decided that if we put 60,000 soccer fans into Ellis Park, all black, televise those proceedings where he swears the oath of office from the Union Buildings on the big screens, then that is 60,000 fewer people clogging up the M1 highway, where I've got to move, I and my team of men and women have got to move 184 of the world's top VIPs who have come to this historic event. So we had heads of state, we had heads of government, we had royalty, and other VIPs, including the late Duke of Edinburgh. He was there. And more importantly than that, than the highway, we had 60,000 fewer people trying to cram onto the lawns of that Union Buildings, because now the people, the black people of South Africa, are celebrating the advent of freedom and democracy. There's a massive party going on there. And you couldn't fit 6 more people on there, never mind 60,000. So that was I call that a stroke of genius, because it certainly made our job a lot easier. But he gets in a helicopter and he flies down south, lands next door, his motorcade picks him up and drives him around the corner and into the stadium. So if you picture this room where we are, over there behind Steve, where those doors are, is the vehicle ramp. Polished wooden floor, President's Suite doors behind you and me, and the field of play that way. Motorcade pulls up, Football Association officials welcome him. He doesn't go into the President's Suite because the teams are on the field, lined up, waiting for him to greet them. South Africa is playing the continental champions, Zambia. He gets into a lift and goes straight down to the dressing room level of the stadium and walks out of the tunnel onto the field of play to greet the teams. And the people in that stadium, 60-odd thousand of them, who have just watched him on TV become our president, are celebrating harder than their compatriots up the road at the Union Buildings. And I'm asking myself, have we done enough? I'd never worked with a predominantly black football crowd, and I'd never worked with Nelson Mandela. And I'm asking myself, I'm still the commander of this unit, have we done enough? Have we got enough resources here? Things go well, he greets the teams, he walks back into the tunnel, comes back up the lift, and immediately apologizes to the officials from SAFA. He says, gentlemen, excuse me, I've got to fly back to Pretoria now. I've got 184 big shot VIPs waiting for me to host them for lunch. He gets in the car. I take a step back so it can drive out. Literally and figuratively breathe a sigh of relief. He's okay. We got him off the field okay. And nothing happens, Dave. The motorcade doesn't move. And we see him trying to open the door of this car that he's just got into. And by the way, it's a 3.8-ton armored BMW. You don't just flick an elbow when you're in your late 70s and the door opens. You need the team leader to give the door a tug. So the team leader asks the bodyguard in the car, he says, hey, why does he want to get out? That guy says, I don't know, he hasn't said anything to me. So the team leader opens the door. President says nothing to the team leader. He gets out the way. Old man climbs out of the car, walks around its bonnet, and starts heading across this polished wooden floor to the vehicle ramp over there where he should be driving out to go to the helipad. And the only bloke standing there, Dave, is an old school apartheid-era police colonel. In his full blue uniform, he's got stars and castles here on his shoulder, he's got some scrambled egg on his cap. And his eyes, ladies and gentlemen, are getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the president is walking directly towards him. And he's got no idea why. And we are just tagging along behind the president, 10 or 12 of us, all cops and security personnel, and we've got no idea why he's going there. And he stops in front of that colonel and puts out his hand and says to him, "Colonel, I just want to tell you that today you have become our police." He said, "I'm now the president of this country, but I want you to know that from today forward, there's no more you and us. You are our police too." And this old warrior, who had the lines on his face to kind of show that he'd pretty much been there and seen it all in a long police career, he started to cry. And the tears were running like this down his face on those lines and dripping on the polished wooden floor. And the president just patted him on the shoulder and said, "It's okay, Colonel. I just needed you to hear that today." Turned on his heel, went back to that BMW, got into it and said, "Let's go to the helipad."
I think you started, or you mentioned earlier on that your expectations of him as president weren't great.
No.
But clearly he changed in that period that you were serving him. You travelled everywhere with him, 5 years serving him as head of security. What was he like personally? And behind the scenes, was he perfect? What was he like with people?
He certainly wasn't perfect, but he was a wonderful, wonderful president and a wonderful principal to serve. And the greatest compliment that I can pay him, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you'd never met him again and you perceived him or watched him on TV, that is exactly how he was. He didn't have a public or electorate-facing image, and then you found out who the real Mandela was. No, there was none of that. Utterly consistent. He spoke to another head of state the same way he spoke to the gardener, the same way he spoke to us, the same way he spoke to his family. And you know how rare that is for anybody, but it's especially rare for a politician. And so that's the greatest compliment I can pay him. He loved children. My friends, if we were in whatever building he was in waiting for him to come out or finish the meeting or whatever, and we saw kids even nearby, we knew, if he comes out and sees those children, there's no way, 100% he's not going to get in the car. He's going to go there. So we would send our men and women there, and we would prepare those kids. We would say to them, the president might. The president's around. He might come and want to talk to you. So please, don't all rush. Don't jump on him. Remember your manners. He'll greet every single one of you, and he'll probably want to sing with you. Not to you, with you. So do you know the words of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? And then some of them would look at you and say, "Get the teacher, teach them now." That's what he's going to sing with them. And that was what he would do. He loved children. And he loved just ordinary people like us. I mean, imagine being locked away for 27 years of your life. So obviously, you want any opportunity to interact with ordinary people, to push the formal, official schedule aside and just talk to people, right? So, what did that mean? When he was dating Mrs. Michelle, who he later married on his 80th birthday, and he wanted to go and buy chocolates or jewelry or flowers, then he would go and want to buy that stuff himself. And we would say to him, "Tata, give us the money, we'll go and get the chocolates." "No, I want to choose them myself." So he walks into a shopping mall in the years before social media, and within seconds, just through an ordinary text message, you've got chaos in that shop because everybody is running. Mandela's in the shop. One day we went to buy a book, just an ordinary book. He told us he wanted to buy a book. He wouldn't tell me what book it is, because then I'm going to tell him I'll go and get it for him. And so we have this, like you have, W.H. Smith. We're in the CNA, the Central News Agency. It's our equivalent of W.H. Smith. And he's looking for this book, and the Bush telegraph activates, and people come running. So I tell my guys, close the doors. They're going to steal everything in the shop. So we start closing the sliding doors of a shop, and he sees us. "No, Rory, no. Tell your men to stop doing that." I said, "Tata, they're going to steal all the books in here." He said, "Okay, close the doors." So he was extremely personable and wanted nothing more than to just talk to ordinary people. And you know, Dave, that maybe you can argue that that represented a security risk. I'm not sure, because if we didn't even know as the protection team, how the bad guy's going to know he's going there? And I'm pretty glad, in fact, I'm proud of the fact that I served a president who loved children and who wanted to be with his people.
It's amazing. You've given us a bit of an insight into your life as his security protection. He came to London in 1996.
He did.
You met the Queen. Am I right in thinking that you nearly lost him in Brixton when he was...
Yeah, that happened, Dave. That happened. So you might appreciate that Brixton probably isn't on the... Oh, there it is. Look at that Rolls Royce there. I'll tell you about that car. Because that's the arrival. That right-hand top photograph is us arriving. It wasn't that quiet when we came out. So Brixton probably isn't right on the average tour of duty of a state visit. But Nelson Mandela asked to go to Brixton. So to Brixton we went, and we would open a community center that Prince Charles's charity built. So there would be all little activities inside with the kids doing lots of wonderful things, and we could control the access there. That was the easy part. Then he would cut the ribbon, proclaim the community center to be open, and then he would walk out down those stairs there that were in that photograph onto the street level, where the bobbies had erected crowd barriers about 4 foot high down both sides of that main street. And the people of Brixton came in their tens of thousands, and they were jammed 12 deep up against those crowd barriers. Because to him, to them, Nelson Mandela is a kind of a messiah. You know, it's a mixed race community, and just take my word for it, he is a kind of a messiah to any mixed race community anywhere on this planet. And as we walked out of that community center, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew, things are going to start jumping in this town today. And there was one of those little gray men next to me, ladies. They exist. And his name was Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Mather, British Army, retired, palace official. I said to him, Colonel, please can you ensure that this whole delegation that's coming out here now behind us go to their vehicles? Because all the vehicles, if you can think of a landing here where we're sitting, the stairs go down and he must walk that way. Only President Mandela and Prince Charles were to walk in the road. Everybody else was to go to the vehicles that are all parked here. And this palace official said to me something along the lines of, young man, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. I said, okay, Colonel, I'm just saying, please make sure the delegation goes to the bus. There's a 44-seater bus there, coach, as you guys would say in Britain, because there were cabinet ministers, captains of industry, high commissioners and their deputies, and the whole lot were in a big bus. Prince Charles's car and his escort vehicle, that Rolls Royce that Queen Elizabeth had given the president, burgundy like this napkin here, serviette, they were all on the left, plus 11 motorcycles from the London Metropolitan Police who escorted a motorcade through the streets of London on a state visit. It's like a rolling roadblock. They go into the intersections, block 4, 5 intersections, the rolls, pun intended, rolls through, and they leapfrog their colleagues, and so it goes. Beautiful, poetry in motion. So we walk down the stairs into the street, and President Mandela and Prince Charles turn right. They're going to walk 100 meters that way, between these crowd barriers. Where do you think the delegation that came out there went? To the bus? They followed them. And the people of Brixton took one look at that and said, who are these guys? Let's join them. And they started to jump over those crowd barriers. So now the bobbies are like 10 meters apart. There's one here and there's one there where that lectern is. So you'll catch 1, 2, and 3 that jump in between us here. But 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the rest are in the road. And now they're running at my president. That's what it looked like in that other photograph there. And I knew we have to get him out of the street. He's going to get trampled here. No malice. There's no malice here. It's all about showing him love. But he was going to get trampled. Look at that Rasta there. What is he doing there in the road? So I said to him, Tata, we must evacuate. Now I need something to evacuate him to. Normally that's a car when you're in the middle of the street. So let me pause this narrative and tell you that when I met the driver who is driving that Rolls Royce that they're going to put my president in, I was expecting a highly trained police officer from the London Metropolitan Police Special Branch. I meet the driver. He's an old geezer of about 90 in the shade from the Royal Mews. I said to the British police, what are you doing? You can't put that guy in the car with my president. What happens if we need to evacuate him? And they just laughed me off, basically. They said, listen, same as the colonel, we've been doing this a long time. That's the way it is here. Live with it. So I thought, okay, where am I going to go? Now I'm going to be in a black Rover, driven by a special branch, highly trained police officer. It's going to be right behind the Rolls. And the commander of those motorcyclists, he's going to ride in front of the Rolls on his motorcycle. Sergeant with 11 of his PCs on their motorbikes. Okay. Now, as I think of this, we got to evacuate him, put him in the car. I remember, oh, man, I've got this wrinkly who's driving my president's car. And the next thing I heard was that radiator turn on of that Rolls Royce. Ladies and gentlemen, he was the only one of all those vehicles that got one of them free from this melee that had enveloped around us. My special branch Rover, driven by my highly trained cop, was nowhere. And we opened the door and we put him into the Rolls. Prince Charles's protection officer is running around that street in Brixton like a chicken without a head. I said, his name was Tony Parker. I said, Tony, put him in the Rolls. Open the door a second time, put Prince Charles in the wrong car because his Jaguar can't get through here. Now I look for Zanani, who was Madiba's daughter. She was the official companion. And I just saw these wild eyes over there and some arms and legs flailing. I shouted to the bobbies, push her forward. That's the president's daughter. They pushed her up the side of the Rolls. And we opened the door a third time, and now there's no space for her in the car because Prince Charles is behind, he's in her seat. But they moved up and they made some room, and we put her in the car, and we kind of like try to straighten it. Because now these people, if Brixton, are still trying to get to the doors of this Rolls Royce. And what saved us was the London Metropolitan Police Service's horses. Those beautiful, huge, well-trained animals with perspex blinkers on their eyes because you guys don't know how to behave at soccer matches. Those horses came in there, 6 of them, 3 on either side of the Rolls Royce. Now I need to stand to show you something. Because when that 17 hands high horse does that with its rump, then a person from Brixton goes from here to there fast. And it was like Moses in the Red Sea, space opened up, and we got the Rolls Royce moving at walking pace, and I figured I'm staying by this door because these people are now still trying to get to the car. They'll take on the horse's hooves. What they want to do, I have no idea. Mob psychosis has taken over. I figured if I can stay by the door, somebody can get to the door, I'm staying there. Now I'm looking over my shoulder. Where's my black Rover from the special branch? And the car gets up to jogging speed. I'm jogging next to the door, looking over my shoulder. There goes the Rolls. We get to the point there, Dave, where we should have picked him up. And it's going to turn right and leave Brixton, and it does that. And the only thing, as I look over my shoulder every now and then, are those motorbikes coming past me. Each one has got a bodyguard on the back, either a British one or a South African one, and I know where they're going. They're going to go and close the intersections. They're going to Trafalgar Square now. And I looked over my shoulder one last time as the number plate was doing that, and I'm losing the race. I'm losing my president in Brixton. And around the corner came not a black Rover, but a beat-up, clapped-out old Renault 5. Remember those things? 2-door Renault 5. And for the only time, Dave, I ever did something that you saw a cop do in a movie or on TV, we commandeered that car right there in that road. We just stopped it and piled into the back. Who's we? A big Zulu from Pietermaritzburg called Spiwe Mkhize, and a big Brit who played in the front row for the London Police rugby team, Frank Armstrong. He later headed Tony Blair's protection detail. He was learning on that trip. And I'm in the middle of these blokes, and I'm not small and they're not small, and we're in the 2-door Renault 5. And I say to my driver who's just saved my career, I said, follow that Rolls, you know, as you do. You know what she said to me, boys? She said, I don't have enough petrol. Lady, you've just saved my police career. Don't tell me this. And I can't say, where do I go, Dave? I can't say to her, don't worry, pull into the BP here, because by the time we get the hose out of the pump, never mind into the neck of the tank, those cops have released the traffic across that Rolls Royce's route, and it's gone. So I pulled the radio off my belt, and I called Detective Inspector Stan Downey, who's a good friend of mine today, in that roles with my president. I said, Stan, where's the nearest police station? Because that's what we would do in South Africa. We would have safe houses on the route. Normally they're police stations. Before Stan answers me on the police radio, my driver tells me, Kennington Police Station, she says. I said, how far is that? She said, it's half a mile up the road. Hey, Stan, tell that driver to turn into Kennington, Nick, half a mile up the road, because you've got the wrong principal in your car, and we need to find these two motorcades. Roger, he says. And bless her little cotton socks, guys, when that Rolls turned in there, she was right behind it. There were a few close calls where the cops let the traffic go and we wiggled through a gap, but we were there. Now, as I sit here before you tonight, I don't know, I honestly, hand on heart, do not know whether I had the common courtesy or the good manners to thank her for saving my police career. I also don't know how I got out of the back of a two-door Renault 5, but it was fast. And I ran into that police station. I said, where's the station commander? And here came the superintendent, striding out. I said, Superintendent, I'm Superintendent Steyn from South Africa. I've got President Mandela and Prince Charles about to walk into your police station. We need to find the motorcades that we've kind of misplaced, make them some tea, and we'll sort this out, please. I thought I was talking to a fish because he stood there like this. I said, Superintendent, your office, tea. We'll sort this out. So in we go. Prince Charles, Dave, thinks that he is responsible for the diplomatic blunder of the century. Mummy's going to smack me. And I'm never going to be king, man, you know. I've messed this one up properly now. I said to him, Your Royal Highness, please don't worry. The president doesn't mind this kind of thing. He doesn't mind just talking to people, even if it's in a police station. He said, really? Do you think so? I said, well, look at him, sir. There's Madiba. Yeah? How are you? So good to see you. Do you recognize me? What is your name? He's greeting the whole charge office, man. Those under arrest, the cops that arrested them, the public in there, no problem. He's greeting everybody. So, of course, the station commander's office would be upstairs and right down the end of the passage. We get them in there, waiting for the tea to be made. I get a call on the radio about 15 minutes later. Okay, Rory, we found the motorcades. Dada, we can go now. Oh, God. Still no tea, Dave. What is this? It's London. It's England. Tetley's and all of that stuff. They were so rattled that day. We found two motorcades before they could make 2 cups of tea. So that's the story about how we nearly lost the president in Brixton. And thank goodness for that lady. I've tried to find her. I put out a thing on Facebook. I recruited people that were there that day. Nobody can find this lady. Surely, when you're driving with your boyfriend and you come around a corner and 3 cops pile into your car, you told somebody, right? Nobody knows who she is. So help me.
It's a wonderful story, thank you. We're going to take a bit of a break at this point, and we're going to have some dessert. Don't forget, if you want to ask Rory some questions, please do text, and I'm going to put the number back up on the screen for you. Text that number. We'll give you 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, to eat our dessert, and then we'll come back, answer some of those questions, and Rory will just close off his talk. So enjoy your dessert, and we look forward to coming back and speaking some more.
Not done yet.
Well, we're going to just resume. We're going to start with some questions. We've had loads of questions, so thank you so much for your questions. There have been a lot of very similar questions, so if the question that I asked Rory isn't absolutely word for word what you asked, it's because I've tried to sort of put them all together and sort of get the best of what I can. So the first question that I'm going to ask Rory is this, and it's from Dave. No, it's not from Dave. The first question is, Rory, could you please explain the difference between white Afrikaners and English speakers in South Africa?
Sure, Kevin, I can, yes. Okay. Please understand this. Sometimes when people look at South Africans, they see the blacks and the whites as 2 homogeneous groups. And that is so far from the truth, it shouldn't even be discussed. Because within black South Africans, we have 9 separate African tribes with 9 separate languages, and they all have their own identity. So they are not homogeneous, because King Shaka Zulu, when he built the Zulu nation, he built it on the back of an army, and he decimated every African tribe within reach of his impi, his soldiers. And since then, African people have been fighting amongst one another for their little bit of a place in the sun. And this one's language is felt to be more important than that one's language, and so on. And also that has its origins in apartheid, because when the Group Areas Act was enacted, it forced people into those geographical areas where their people came from. So black South Africans are not a homogeneous group. And white South Africans definitely are not a homogeneous group, even though there's only 2 languages spoken within white people in South Africa. The Afrikaner and the British fought 2 Anglo-Boer wars together, or not together, against one another at the turn of the last century. And my dear British friends, whether you want to admit it or acknowledge it or not, the British imprisoned Afrikaner women and children in concentration camps during the Second Anglo-Boer War, and hundreds of thousands of those women and children died. So the Afrikaner hated the British. Now we are 60 years on, or, well, we're not fully 60 years on after apartheid, but we're more than 120 years on from the Second Anglo-Boer War. So a lot of those emotions have subsided. But please trust me, or if you don't believe me, come with me, and let me take you to a high school rugby match. When an Afrikaans high school plays against an English high school in rugby, we reenact the Boer War for 70 minutes. Just believe me, it's brutal. So, that's what my dad understood. And that's why, folks, it was so symbolic and so important when President Mandela pulled on that Springbok rugby shirt in 1995, when we were playing the World Cup final against the All Blacks at that same stadium, Ellis Park. It was literally a year and a month later after the events that I described to you when he had this interchange with that colonel that so changed my life. So, I've already explained to you that Nelson Mandela came to understand the psyche of the Afrikaner by talking to his jailers. And in some of those talkings and interactions, he came to learn that that symbol, that leaping antelope, was so important to the Afrikaner. Why was it important? Because during the sanction years, when there was a sporting and cultural boycott against South Africa, the Afrikaner flouted that boycott by playing rugby and excelling in rugby, because it was a masculine thing to do and we could beat up the whole world, and we invited rebel teams and we didn't want to abide by the cultural boycott. So the Springbok came to be seen by the majority of South Africans as a symbol of oppression or of apartheid. It wasn't originally so, because if you look at history, in the First World War, black and white South African soldiers fought under the Springbok on their beret. But that was the First World War. That was long before the Nats came to power, and this symbol, which was only a sporting emblem, became a symbol of oppression. So after democracy, the South African Sports Congress, friends, voted to completely abolish the Springbok as the symbol of our sporting teams. So today, I don't know whether you've noticed this, but today our cricket team, men and women teams, our hockey teams, men and women, our Olympians, all compete under a protea, which is our national flower. Rugby is the only sport that has a Springbok on our shirt. And the only reason that we still play under the Springbok was because Nelson Mandela stood up to the South African Sports Congress and he said to them, no. He said, we have got to retain that symbol, because if we do, at least it will soften the attitudes of the Afrikaner to some extent, and they will be receptive to some of the initiatives that we are trying to implement which would unite South Africans. So, when those two teams lined up on that same field on the 24th of June, 1995, the Springboks and the All Blacks to play the Rugby World Cup final, nobody knew that he was going to walk out there to greet the teams wearing that number 6 shirt. In fact, he'd only instructed his secretary in that week before the final. He said to her, Mary, you see, you all forgot to ask me about Mary. He said to her, Mary, go and get me a Springbok shirt. So Mary, of course, asked the team manager, and the team manager, for whatever reason, grabbed a number 6 shirt, which was the number of our captain, Francois Pienaar, and gave Mandela that shirt. So he literally knocked on the door of the dressing room a few minutes before kickoff. And Francois Pienaar says in an interview, you can see it. If you Google on the World Rugby Hall of Fame, you'll see that interview. He said, I didn't know. There's a knock on the door. The president says he wants to come and wish the team luck. And in he walks and he starts greeting the team. And when he turned around, Francois saw that he was wearing that number 6 shirt. And that's when he knew that we were not going to lose that test match. We would probably have lost to the All Blacks 19 out of 20 times, but not that day. And he walks out from greeting the teams onto the field. They've run out and lined up now, just before the anthems are sung. And that predominantly Afrikaner, all-white crowd sees that Springbok shirt and that number 6 on the back, and they start to chant his name. Go and look at the reruns of those tapes. They are chanting, Nelson, Nelson, Nelson. Because as I said to you, we didn't yet know the term Madiba. And I literally, Steve, pinched myself. Literally pinched myself, because I could not hear, I could not believe what my ears were hearing, that an Afrikaner crowd who, like me, a few months ago, considered this man to be a terrorist, are chanting his name now, purely because, and only because he put that Springbok shirt on. It was a stroke of genius. And it didn't turn the Afrikaners into ANC supporters. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what it did do is they all said, we will give him a chance because we think he can be trusted. If he's prepared to do that, we will listen, and we will try and see where this agenda of his goes, of building one South Africa. And of course, he was able to give the World Cup to Francois Pienaar, 120 minutes later, because there was extra time. And what did Francois Pienaar say? In a moment of complete clarity, the announcer from television gives him the World Cup and says, Francois, this is on behalf of 58 million people. And he said, no, David, not for, he says this is in front of 60,000 people. And he said, no, David, not 60,000, 58 million people. Right there, this agenda of the president's was succeeding. So sorry that took a bit long, but that's the reason. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question, different this one, but it says, I imagine even in a work context, meeting Mr. Mandela for the first time must have been a humbling moment. Can you just tell us about that first meeting?
Well, it was at that stadium when he spoke to the colonel. Okay. Yeah, so I've told you that.
Oh, that's good. And the follow-up to that, so this person starts their question with a quote. It says, and this is a quote from Mandela, it says, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. He's hugely inspirational to people in custody still now. I have it displayed in my office in the prison. So this person is a prison officer. My question is, 1, did he manage to leave it behind? And 2, do you feel this was easy for him? And how much influence did his faith play in this?
Great question, and thank you for that. Yes, he did absolutely leave it behind. And one of the things that struck such a chord with me, Dave, was this. I think we must stop this now. In all seriousness, one of the things that struck such a chord with me was the fact that he said, we have not just liberated black South Africans, we have also liberated white South Africans. Because white South Africans, so the president felt entrapped by the skin we were born with, and by the fact that this iniquitous system that had come into being in 1948 had tarred us all under the same brush and almost forced us into this place in history where we were considered the polecats of the world. So to liberate his own people also liberated white South Africans. And I, for one, truly appreciated that. Just read the second part of the question again, please, Dave.
So, did he manage to leave it behind? And do you feel this was easy for him? And how much influence did his faith play in this?
Okay, so how much influence did his faith play? And I often get asked this question. Rory, was Nelson Mandela a Christian? And the answer that I always used to give, and consistently so, was I don't know, because he never told me. Just like he never told me why he did some of those things that he was put on trial for. He didn't tell me that. But he knew that I was a Christian, and he knew that I was involved in my church, because I was able to tell him that in a conversation that we had. So my prayer always, Dave, I used to pray, Lord, because remember this, all of Mandela's education from kindergarten right up to university was at institutions established by British Methodist missionaries, all of the schools. So he heard the gospel 100%. And I would pray, Lord, if he doesn't know you and he's not a child of yours, then please remind him of the stuff that he learned as a little boy and as a young man. And I continued to pray that prayer even when I stopped serving him after he stepped out of office in 99. When he died, there was nothing else on our TV screens or in our media, pardon me. For the 10 days between his death and his burial, it was just Mandela. And there were letters in the newspaper, and one letter said, it was written by a Dutch Reformed church minister, like Steve, a church minister, a pastor of a local church, but from the Afrikaans denomination, the biggest one. As I said, the Dutch Reformed Church, or the NG Kerk. And he writes of an encounter in an airport terminal. And as soon as I read this, I could see the movie in my head, because I saw this 100 times. Because when Mama Grassa, or Mrs. Michelle, would fly down from Maputo in Mozambique into Joburg to come and visit him, he would go to the airport himself to go and pick her up. So again, he walked into that arrivals hall, chaos we've got to deal with. You know? And he had this amazing ability, folks. He would scan a room like this, and he would pick out the leaders in this room just by their deportment and their body language. And he would walk right up to that person, and he had this disarming strategy. He would put out his hand and say, you may recognize me, but what is your name? And then the guy would tell him. And he said to this guy, so he writes, so I'm relating this to you secondhand. I read it in the paper, and I'm telling you what I read. He writes, well, since you asked, Mr. President, I'm a Dutch Reformed church minister. Oh, he says, I had so much respect for Professor Johan Haynes, who was the head of that denomination, who apologized publicly for apartheid. So at least one church leader apologized for the fact that the church defended apartheid at some point in our history. And this pastor then continues to write that the president then said to me, I too follow Jesus Christ, but I can't say that as publicly as you can, because I'm the president of all South Africans. Yeah. And I remember reading this and thinking, thank you, Lord, that's the answer to my prayer.
That's great. Yeah. And so you've told us a little bit about Mandela and his faith, but we haven't actually heard about how you came to faith, Rory. Perhaps you could just tell us that.
Good question, and thanks, Mike, for bringing it back to that, because when my father gave me that book by John Blanchard all those years ago, when I was going into the police college and that Afrikaner-dominated environment that I told you about, he said, my boy, just read some of this book. And probably for no other reason than that, I did, because my dad came to know Jesus Christ when I was about 12, and he then tried very hard to kind of play catch-up, and you can't do that. But he knew that there were certain responsibilities as a Christian father that he didn't fulfill. So he sent us to the youth groups at school. He sent us on youth camps during the school holidays. He sent us to catechism classes in the Church of England in South Africa, and I was confirmed in that church. But to be honest with you, all of you, I really was dabbling a bit with that Christianity. I didn't take it seriously because I figured that can come later. There's too much fun to be had now. I'm young. And so if I go to Pretoria, to Police College, I read that book and I read my Bible. And one night, and it must have been in February of that 1982 year, because I subsequently found that old Bible during lockdown, COVID lockdown. And there in the margin of Psalm 2, I had written the date, because Psalm 2 says, "Today I've become your father. Today you have become my son." And I remember it was almost like somebody switched on a light under that page. Bing! And it said, I said to myself, almost this voice in my head was saying, "Rory, stop messing around now. This is it. It's now or never." And I said, "Okay, Lord." In a quiet prayer, I said, "I understand that you are my creator and that you have certain command or demands on my life because you made me. And I've been messing around, and today I'm going to get serious." I said, "Jesus, please come and fix this mess. Come and sail the ship that way, because I've been going that way. We need a steady hand at the tiller and all that." And the great thing that still blows my tiny little mind is that was 1982. I didn't meet Nelson Mandela until 1994. So that's a 12 or 13-year gap here. If I had died in the line of duty, been shot by somebody trying to kill the president, hit by a bus, whatever, I would have, despite all the messed up stuff and the prejudice in my heart that God was still working through in a process, I still would go to heaven. Not because I was good in any way, because I'm not, but because of what Jesus did all those years ago. And that blows my mind. God's grace and his love is so big that for a messed up cop, growing up in this crazy system, I was acceptable to God. And another thing, sorry, I know that you wanted to get a question here. My brother, he lives in Canada now, but he's a church minister in Canada. He brought a black friend of his to come and pray with me at some stage through there. And only when I got down on my knees next to a black South African, I started to pray. God switched on another light in my head, and it said this to me: "How dare I look down on a black person and consider them inferior to me when they were good enough for Jesus to die for? How can I do that?" And those are the processes that started to work through my life. But it wasn't until 95 when I heard President Mandela say that to my colleague, that colonel, that I decided, okay, I'm in. I'm going to buy into this agenda of his, which was to unite South Africa. And I'm going to give it a shot.
And I think you've pretty much covered what I was going to ask, the essential difference between Mandela, how he changed your life, and how Jesus Christ changed your life. And we've got a slide that just prompts us to sort of, there we have it, it's gone. It's one back from that. That's the one.
Oh, man.
Just to tell us about that. What would you encourage people today to leave here thinking about Jesus more? Why would you encourage them to think?
Okay. So just take a little step back from that slide. If you're asking me right now, Mike, if you're saying to me that two men, or really three, because my dad would have been the first, but if you're saying that these two men that we've spoken about, Jesus Christ in 82, Nelson Mandela in 94, changed my life profoundly. And if you're asking what the difference is, then I'll answer it this way. Folks, Nelson Mandela never claimed to be the sinless Son of God. He never claimed to be able to forgive sin. In fact, he said, "I'm not a saint, and people should not treat me as if I were." I heard it with these ears. So Mandela was saying, I'm not perfect, and he wasn't perfect. But to my Christian ear, what I'm hearing is, I too need a savior. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is, I was there that day. You could put that slide back up there, please, Steve. I was there that day when he was buried. It was the 13th of December, 2013, and that's on his farm in Kunu in the Eastern Cape, where he grew up. That was a Sunday. The day before, That coffin with that national flag containing his last mortal remains was standing in the front of an aircraft hangar at one of our Air Force bases in Pretoria, because his body lay in state, folks, for 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And, pardon me, and any South African could come and walk past that coffin and pay their respects to a man who was genuinely beloved in our country. On the Saturday, there's now a sending off ceremony of that casket to go to its final resting place in Kulu. And the who's who of South African political elite, the Mandela family, they're all there in very somber black attire, showing that they're mourning. And there's a ceremony going on. There are proceedings being conducted while the Air Force prepare to load the coffin on a plane and fly it down there. And we, as the protection team, were invited to that ceremony. We were special guests. My friends, it was a tremendous privilege, one of the greatest privileges of my 58-year life. Because when we were around the president, we were working. We had our game faces on and we had a job to do. You know, no matter what the occasion was, you can't get sidetracked by that stuff. We had to keep him safe. That was our job. That day, we were invited guests. And what that meant was, while the proceedings continued, protocol officers would come and get 10 of us at a time. And they called us up, and we stood 5 on either side of that casket. And they just left us alone there for 2 or 3 minutes with our own thoughts and memories. Our heads were bowed, and we knew whose body was in that box. And the next day, and then they flew it that day to Gunu. The next day, I'm working, because I've now got an overseas guest that we are protecting, who has been invited to the funeral, flies in from overseas on a private plane, flies down to Mthatha Airport, and now we're working. So there's a 2,000-seater marquee on his farm where the funeral service is held, and then that coffin comes out of the funeral marquee on a gun carriage. Those senior officers standing there are slow marching behind that coffin and the cannon, up a little hill, about 200 meters up the hill, to that gravesite. So that's it, about to go into the hole in the ground now. And that's where it is. And that's the point, friends. That coffin with Madiba's body is in that hole in the ground right now as you and I sit here. But Jesus' body, my friends, somewhere, or his tomb rather, his grave, somewhere on a hillside outside Jerusalem, is what? It's empty, my friend. Because what happened when Mary ran there on that first Easter Sunday morning? She had just watched them murder her Lord on Good Friday. So I don't think it was a very good Friday for Mary. She goes there on Sunday morning, not even knowing whether she can access the tomb where his body is, to see if she can take care of it. It's smashed up and beaten and thorns and whips and the rest. And she wants to care for it. So she runs there early in the morning and she finds the stone in front of the tomb is rolled open. And the grave is open, and she goes in and she sees the grave clothes there on the rocky ledge where they lay him. And there's a bloke sitting over there who she thinks is the gardener. And she says to him, "What have you done with my Lord's body?" And of course, it's not the gardener, it's the risen, resurrected Christ. And what does he say to her? He says, "Mary, it's me. I have risen." And we're going to sing that, aren't we, in about 3 Sundays' time. Hallelujah. Christ has risen. So his tomb is empty, my friends, and that's a massive, massive difference. I too will go into my hole in the ground one day, which means that the very profound change in my life that Mandela wrought by his kindness to me, his loyalty to me, because the intelligence services went to him and said, "You must get rid of that Steyn. He's got a security police background." And the president told them no. He said, "You leave that boy there. He's doing a good job." Later he told me, "Rory, they wanted me to fire you." And I said no. So in a position that demanded extraordinary loyalty to that office, irrespective of who the incumbent was, I swore an oath as a police officer to protect that office. He was loyal to me long before I was ever called upon to be loyal to him. And you know, Hollywood are quick to write things in movie scripts like, you know, "I'll take a bullet for so-and-so." That's very easy to say in a Hollywood script. It's not so easy to say when that's your job 9 to 5. You've got to come to a physical decision that if necessary, I will be prepared to put my body in harm's way to protect in this case, my president. And that was the day I knew that I would be prepared to do that. I don't say that lightly. Please understand. I say that with a lot of gravitas. Because my president was loyal to me long before I was ever called upon to be loyal to him. And folks, that is a picture of what Jesus Christ did. I don't want to trivialize that extraordinary. That is the greatest act of love in human history, what he did on that cross. But when one person puts his life and is prepared to say, I lay it down in the place of another, is exactly what Jesus did. So Mandela's body is in the ground. Jesus' tomb is empty. And the last thing I'll say, and then I said that Mandela affected my life from a human perspective, but it ends when I go to my grave. But Jesus' effect on my life is eternal because it gets me to spend eternity with his Father in heaven. And my friends, here tonight, I say this with every ounce of respect for you that I can muster, because I don't know you. I respect you, though. It really doesn't matter to me if you're sitting here tonight and you're thinking to yourself, but I don't believe in life after death. To me, that's irrelevant, my friends, because whether you believe it or not, life after death is a reality. When we pass from this life, like Mandela did, like I will, like you will, we stand before the God who created us, and there we must account. And he's going to ask us, on what basis do I let you into my heaven with me? And then it's not going to matter whether you're an Anglican, a Catholic, a Methodist, a Wesleyan, a happy clappy, or a whatever. The only answer you can give to your Creator on that day, and you will stand there by yourself, is, Lord, on the basis of what your Son did for me. On that basis, I ask you, let me in. Because there's nothing good in us that can get us there. And that's the last thing I want to say, Mike. And with this, we can close. Because, my friends, a lot of people say to me, wow, Rory, you had a tremendously privileged life. And I did. Wasn't Mandela a wonderful human being? What a tragedy it will be if we get to heaven one day and Mandela's not there. He was such a good man. No, my friends, no. If you've heard nothing else from me tonight, hear this. Nelson Mandela, or you and I, cannot get to heaven by living a good life. The Bible says that God considers our righteous acts as filthy rags. That's what he thinks of our righteous acts. So please don't sit here tonight and think, I don't need this Jesus. I've lived a good life. I've been kind. I've never cheated on my taxes. That's rubbish. It can't get you anywhere with God. Only what Jesus did, and he's done it all for you. You don't even have to do anything other than get on your knees and say, thank you, Lord. I accept your sacrifice, and I know that you are the one that can get me over the line and into eternity. Please don't rest tonight. I don't want you to have any peace and quiet if you haven't settled in your mind this issue of eternity, because you need to face it. And I hope and pray that God is speaking to your heart tonight, and that you consider the claims that Jesus has on your life, because he died for you. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening to me tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Rory. It's been fascinating, and I'm sure we'd like to show our appreciation to Rory for what he's shared with us this evening. And if you have been stirred by what Rory said, and I hope you have, there are some books on the table. Please feel free to take one of these books. Are you sure, or are you 100% sure you want to be an agnostic? It's a very short book. It's a great read, and hopefully it will answer some questions or confirm some stuff for you. Similarly, if you've been stirred and you want to join us on a Sunday morning, we're here at 10:30 every Sunday. We'd love to see you here with us. And also, we've got coming up in just a couple of weeks' time after Easter a short course called Hope Explored. Just 3 weeks. There's some cards on the table just explaining what that's all about. There'll be dinner provided, another dinner. We can't give you enough food in this place. It's amazing. And so do come along, invite a friend, and find out more, because we'd absolutely love you to follow up on what Rory shared with us this evening. So thank you once again for coming out this evening. It's been great to see you, and I do hope that you've had a good evening and a challenging evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.